Welcome to Leesburg's Parks and Recreation Show. I'm your host, Claudia Verga. Many of us attend sporting events. Have you ever wondered how they get their grass so green? Today we're at Sleepy Hollow Complex, and Jennifer McGavro, Leesburg's Assistant Director of Parks, will be telling us all their secrets. Welcome, Jen.
Thanks, Claudia.
So when do I get to take it out for a test drive?
Oh, we got work to do. I'll put you to work later, though.
Darn. So what's the difference between our grass and sport grass?
Sports turf is an actual different variety. At your home, you usually have St. Augustine, which is something that looks like this. It's a very thick bladed grass. It's on a very thick rhizome, grows through your yard. Very coarse, it can take some wear, but it's a very long grass. You just can't cut it short, so it's not ideal for sports turf. Another homeowner grass is Bahia. It is slightly thinner bladed, but still it tends to be a longer grass. You know, what you're looking at is above where the stem is, where the actual blades come out, and that's just a little too tall for what people want to run on for a sports turf. And you know, the other problem is it's not very wear tolerant. You know, people with Bahia grasses, they tend to have bare patches in their wear patterns in their yards. So what we have for sports turf, and look at the difference with that, is Bermuda. Very, very thin bladed grass. And there's just so much of it. It has that beautiful carpet look, real feathery. And you see where it comes from, where it's all together as a stem to the blades is very short. So we can maintain it very short and keep it like a short turf grass. Real easy to run on, low impact if you fall down. But that's what makes it a turf grass.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question. There's a big difference between the thickness of this grass and this grass,
yes,
obviously. So what you mow, would that be different?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
How you mow it?
Exactly. Your maintenance is just completely night and day different. What you'll do with your St. Augustine is you use a rotary mower. Rotary mowers where you have one solid blade, or if you have a bigger mower, it's two long blades, like I've shown the maintenance, with two cutting edges, and it goes in a circle and cuts the grass. You need that just because of how thick this stem is. It blunts the blade. You can get maybe one season of mowing just because of how thick this grass is, how difficult it is to cut. With a grass this fine, that kind of heavy blade is just going to knock it down. It's not going to cut it. We use reel mowers. It's a different cutting technique that actually has a more precision cut, and it's got a roller that'll lay the grass down. You know those really cool patterns you see on the professional sports fields?
Yes.
That's from the rollers on those mowers. As it cuts it, the roller lays it so it goes in one direction, then they go in another direction, and that whole 6-foot swath lays in the other direction. It just gives it a very attractive finished look.
So that's done on purpose?
Yes, it is intentional.
Oh, wow. Who knew? Okay. How often would you mow this grass as opposed to regular grass?
Well, in your yard, and we've discussed it before with lawn maintenance, we say never take more than the top third of the grass blade. And that's the blade part above where the heavy stem is. You never want to take more than a third, and you want to maintain your St. Augustine between 3 and 4 inches. So, you know, you look at this, and you might just be nicking the top of this, so no more than once a week. Now you look at this, and the blade on this, you know, that's maybe what, an inch and a quarter? If you don't want to take more than a third of the grass blade length, you're just taking the very tip off. To do that, you do that maybe 3 times a week. It's much more labor intensive. That's why we don't use it in our yards.
Okay.
It's just so labor intensive. It tends to look scraggly. If it does get too tall, it tends to look kind of bare. It's best maintained at that short height. But, I mean, would you want to mow your yard 3 times a week?
I don't want to yield my
Exactly, one time a week, exactly. A much different level of care and maintenance.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of field here.
Yes.
And by keeping it green, I'm assuming you're watering it, irrigation?
Yes.
How do you maintain such big
Well,
areas?
a lot of people assume that with a sports field, oh, you know, it's high performance, high maintenance. It must need a lot more water than my grass, and it's actually not true. Your St. Augustine in your yard is much thirstier than the Bermuda here. This is a much more drought tolerant grass. It's the most heat tolerant of the turf grasses, and it's the blade doesn't lose a lot of water. So we have the same water restrictions as homeowners. We don't get any special allowance just because we're a sports field. So we do the same watering as a homeowner. So during the hottest part of the summer, it's 1 to 2 days a week. During the winter, it's the same. But fortunately, you know, with this type of grass, it performs better with that smaller amount of water, whereas a lot of times you'll see stress with your St. Augustine if we're not getting supplemental rains.
Right. And that makes sense now, Bermuda, heat,
yes,
that
exactly,
it can hold up
yeah.
to that. And I really find it interesting that you can't water more. I would assume that you would be able to water more. So that was great.
Yeah, no, we adhere to the same restrictions as everybody else in the city. There is no special allowance.
Huh. Now, we talked about that it could really uphold to the Florida heat, but what about when we get cold for a couple of months over the winter?
All of our Florida grasses, they go dormant because they can take the extreme heats that we get. They're just incapable of taking a lot of cold weather. And it's not even so much the cold as a shortening day length as well. Everything needs a period of rest. So with the shortening day length, cooler night temperatures, the Bermuda will go dormant. What we do, because we have sports going on all season long, you've got to protect that Bermuda, because if it goes dormant, while you're still playing on it, you're going to start getting bare patches. When you have bare patches, the weeds will come in. So what we do is we come in with an annual rye seed. And I've discussed that before in other shows.
Right.
We actually do that here not for aesthetics. We do that here to protect our Bermuda grass. We come in the fall. As this is starting to go dormant, we go through and we put down the rye seed. That starts to come up, protects that Bermuda. We're still running programs. Then comes spring, as the days get longer, the nights start getting warmer, that rye, because it just can't take the heat, it starts to die out. Then we'll actually do a chemical application to finish killing the rest of it out, because at that time is when our Bermuda is starting to come out of a dormancy. So as soon as we can get that rye killed out, we're hitting the Bermuda with some fertilizer and we're up and running.
Now, you use the chemical to kill the rye so it's not taken away from the Bermuda being...
Yeah, it becomes a competition. You've got two grasses there competing for the same nutrients. If you fertilize before you kill out the rye, and you've just got the Bermuda coming out of dormancy, that rye is still more dominant and it's going to take that nutrients. So what you want to do is get that completely out of the equation, and that Bermuda, which is coming out of dormancy, you know, it's going to take that fertilization on top of, you know, all the sunlight it's getting, because it gets a little bit shaded out with all the ryegrass.
Okay.
And it just greens up right away, and it just gets real vibrant and lush.
And the chemical process from getting rid of the rye doesn't hurt the Bermuda?
No, it's a selective herbicide. You know, you apply it and it kills out just the rye. We also have herbicides that we apply for weeds.
Okay.
We have pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides. Sometimes a pre-emergent, that's before the weed actually comes out, we'll put that out and it can suppress those weeds germinating. And then a post-emergent herbicide is where we've already got the weeds out. You know, they're living in the grass, we want to suppress them. And that's another selective that we'll spray and it'll kill out the weed but leave the desired turf grass, which is the Bermuda.
Okay, well, who knew?
I know, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and it looks so beautiful, so it's obviously well worth it.
Yes.
I know that they can't see it, but what is going on here in the ground?
I know, it looks a little bit like a beach here. And this is all part of the process. It's actually the most important process. What happens in your yard where you've got kids or you have pets, you notice the areas they tend to travel the most get thin, the grass gets thin, and a lot of people think that's just because the feet are wearing out the grass. That's half the equation. The other problem is your wear patterns where you walk the most, you're compressing the soil. Every footfall you do pushes those soil particles a little firmer and a little more compact, where there's less airspace and there's less water penetration. Well, you multiply that by the hundreds of people we get on this field every week and thousands every month, and that's a lot of compaction that we get. So what we do is we come in periodically and we aerate. And that's what this machine is for.
Oh.
I know you had fun sitting on it.
I want to drive it still.
I know. And if you look behind it, there's a mechanism with a bunch of hollow teeth, just like this.
Okay.
And it's got this hollow compartment, and it punches holes into the turf, pulls out a core, and that core of soil looks like this.
Okay.
It pulls out, and feel how compacted. That soil is so compacted,
yeah.
it stayed together even after we pulled it out. We'll pull out that core of soil. So now you've got a hole in the turf, you know, about this size, and then we'll go back through and we'll drag it off and break up the cores so we don't lose that soil. And then we go back and we put sand in there. And that sand is a larger grain than the natural soil. There's a lot of clay in here, and then some other silty type soils, which are very small particles. Well, that sand grain is probably 5 times larger than the next largest soil particle. And that creates a big pocket where air and water can come back into those layers of soil, and we can get the water into the grass. I'll actually show you down here. We haven't sanded it yet, but we have areas where it's so compacted that the moisture would just settle on top of the grass, and we would get algae growing on top of the soil.
So that's actually algae?
Yeah. The stuff you find in lakes, we actually have so much compaction, the water can't come through the soil profile, and just sitting there, it starts to grow algae.
Well, obviously, you don't want algae on the sports fields.
No, that would be bad. It's very slippery. Yeah. So this combats that.
Okay. So the aerating is kind of like rototilling in your garden. Would that be kind of similar?
Somewhat. A little less destructive, because we don't want to ruin the grass, but we just want to introduce those pockets of air and water and fertilizer into the root zone.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of steps to keeping this grass looking so good. How do you guys keep it all straight?
We monitor it. You know, we come out, oh my gosh, we've got algae growing, we need to get this done right away. Let's get the aerator out, let's get the sanding. The better way to do it, so you're not putting out fires, is just to schedule it. Every year we have a schedule. We know about what the Florida weather is going to give us, and that's a benefit of living in Florida. We know summer's hot, winter's cool, you know, spring and fall, there's no predicting. We get rains typically in the summer, and we plan accordingly. We'll say, okay, late winter, early spring, we're going to come through, we're going to do our aerating so we can get this all taken care of before the Bermuda starts to really go nuts in the summer. So that's what we're prepping it for. We're prepping this Bermuda while it's dormant so that when we fertilize it come spring, it can get to the root zone and take off. Similarly with the herbicide application, you know, we know late spring we need to kill out the rye. With the weeds, there are weed cycles. Early spring is grassy weeds, late spring is the broadleaf weeds. So we plan to do the herbicide applications with that.
Okay. And what about when we have hotter summers than we normally do?
It doesn't make much difference.
Does that impact your schedule at all?
No, it hurts the people doing programming out here. But no, fortunately with our turf, it can handle that. It's actually a colder winter than normal, which will hurt us. Even though the rye can handle, the annual rye can handle cold weather, when we get really severe frost like we had about 3 years ago, that will actually kill out the top surface of the rye. We had big dead patches of rye. It'll grow out of that, but until it does, we have to be careful about field usage because it leaves that Bermuda grass vulnerable.
Okay. So while the rye's on, you're still having sports activities out here, like soccer or?
On these fields, of course, baseball, t-ball, softball, any of those related sports. We've got the soccer fields, which also do football. There's no telling. Sometimes we have kickball. It's whatever we've got going on, but our programming is year-round.
Okay.
Kids want to get out here and they want to play, so we keep these fields as playable as possible all year long.
And how does the herbicides and chemical processes that you do, how does that play into that?
Oh, with scheduling?
Yeah.
When we're going to do an application.
Safety, like is it safe to be on the field after those services have happened?
No, what we do is every chemical has an REI, which is a re-entry interval. And that's from the manufacturer. That tells you the minimum amount of time you need for the field to be playable. We'll coordinate that with the programming so that we not only have that amount of time, but we like to give it an extra day just to be safe. So we coordinate that with the programming.
This field's pretty big. I don't know the size of it, but how long does it take to maintain a field of this size?
Well, just with the aerating and the sanding, it takes about a half a day to do the aerating and the sanding. and then you multiply that by the 8 adult softball fields. We've got 4 more fields down there, and then the 2 big soccer fields. You know, this facility was shut down for about a year, so it's taken all of our crew about a little over a month to get it back into operating order.
So it was shut down for a year. Were you maintaining it while it was not being used, or?
During that time, we didn't do this type of maintenance. We had the irrigation running, so we didn't want to lose the turf should it reopen. But the rest of it went, you know, went by the wayside in terms of maintenance, which meant a lot of weed growth. The clay play areas had a lot of grass growing onto it. The soil compaction just got that much worse without us aerating. Just all that comes up, the day-to-day maintenance that we can monitor wasn't taken care of. So it's probably taken us twice as long as it would have normally to do these maintenance procedures.
You know, you bring up a good point, because here in Florida we have a lot of foreclosed homes.
Yes.
And a lot of vacant properties, and people purchasing those now as the market's coming back around, and they're going to get into a home with the grass that has been...
Oh, the grass is this tall, it's full of weeds, trees are overgrown. Yeah, exactly, that is a big issue.
Tips from your experience here, what could they do to minimize the work that they're going to have to do at their home?
It's going to be work no matter what. First thing you're just going to have to do, you know I emphasize taking the grass no further than 1/3 of the blade length, but you know, when you're facing a situation like that, and we faced that here, the grass was overgrown, you're just going to have to take it down. You have to take it down and monitor it for weed issues that come up, and you're going to have to attack the weeds in the beds, because that's the other thing, is weeds and turf, they know no boundaries. They grow into all the bed areas, they grow around trees. Best bet is to get the Roundup. That's what we did with a lot of these areas where the clay is we hit the outermost areas with Roundup, got those killed off, and then came back and trimmed. Do as much chemical control as you can first. That'll save your back for when you then have to come in and do the cutting and the hacking back, trimming up trees, cutting back bushes. It's a lot of work.
Okay, you mentioned that the grass might be yay high. Right?
Yes.
We joke about that, but it's true. It could be.
It is true.
Do you recommend that they use the lawnmower and go? I mean, is that safe? Should you weed whack it down? Like,
yeah, exactly. See, you have been paying attention. Yeah, exactly that. The weed eater is your best bet. Most lawnmowers are not going to handle the growth that tall. You'll just burn out your motor with your blade trying to cut that. You know, like I mentioned, you've got this big rotary blade. Well, if the grass is that much taller than the blade, it's just not going to spin. Or you're knocking it down as you drive over it, and there's just nothing to cut. Your best bet, as intensive as it sounds, is to get out there with a weed eater, unless you want to hire someone who's got a tractor. But I'd use a weed eater. Most residential lots, it won't take you very long at all to get through it all with a weed eater. Then come in behind yourself with the mower, and because you'll have all this tall grass laying, go back through, get it chopped up some more, or even better yet, rake it up and bag it, because that long grass laying on your existing grass, which is already stressed because you cut it further than that 1/3 mark, you're going to want to get that off, because you're going to want the air to hit it in the sun so it can start regrowing.
Okay. Now you mentioned using chemicals to help get rid of the weeds. What about people who are more, they don't want to use chemical products, they want to keep more organic?
Oh, be more natural?
More natural approach. What would you recommend for them?
Unfortunately, I don't know any organic, I don't think there are any organic herbicides to kill back weeds. So it's going to be all hand labor, you know, using your edger and using your shovel and digging it out and cutting back your lines, your turf lines, and getting those weeds out of the beds. Certainly doable. I myself, you know, I do everything organically.
I know, that's why I was wondering if you had any tips that you could share with us.
I have not yet found an organic herbicide, but I'm still looking.
All right, well, great. So it sounds like it takes like a lot of work if you want to roll up your sleeves and do it more natural approach, and it takes a lot of work to maintain these fields.
Yes.
On that note, I guess I have a lot of work to do. I should get
you
going.
Do.
Thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you next time on Leesburg's Parks and Recreation Show.